Okay, now we're on air. Welcome everybody to the Open Ag Learning Series. I think this is our 5th session. We're going to have this week the folks from Photosynq.org here at Michigan State University talking about their device and their research platform. For those who haven't seen the Open Ag Learning Series yet, this is a kind of learning series of webinars that we kind of have put together after a meeting that's wherein we realized there's all sorts of open source projects going on around gathering data in agricultural systems, and kind of wanted to get all those folks together in the same place. So with that, I think we'll do quick rounds of introductions. My name is Dan Kane. I'm a research technician at Michigan State University. And we'll just go down the line. Abe?
Abe Collins. I'm with Column Grazing and Landstream and the Soil Carbon Coalition. And
Amanda?
Hi, Amanda Joy Ravenhill here, the Executive Director of Project Drawdown.
Dorn?
Doran Cox with Green Start, Executive Director of Green Start and President of FarmHack, and working with Mike Stenta, who's here on the call, also on the FarmOS project.
Sure. So Mike? Go ahead.
Yep, I'm Mike Stenta, and I'm developing FarmOS, os.org.
Great. And with that, we'll go ahead and hand it over for the presentation to Greg Ostick and Dan Turvest.
Hey, yep, I'm Greg.
I'm Dan.
And we'll be talking about the Photosynq platform instead. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to do a little presentation first. I'm going to sort of speed it up as compared to my normal, and then just dive into like collecting a little bit of data and showing you how it actually works. So, but if there's requests at any point to change that, feel free to just let me know. Yeah, we'll just do it. So, all right. So Photosynq, we've been working on this project for a little over 2 years, probably 2.5 years now, and our goal is to create a platform in which anyone can quickly and easily create, share, and analyze plant health information. And our lab is really focused on photosynthesis. It's a Framer lab. Dave Framer's the head of the lab at MSU in the plant research lab. So we're quite good at making protocols related to photosynthesis and equipment related to photosynthesis. And that was the impetus, but it really grew into sort of a larger project concept around sort of democratization of science and the ability to ask and answer really big questions across the world. And I think we'll understand more of that as we go through. I'm not even going to explain this in any detail because we're actually just going to do it. But let's skip that. But we have a couple of specific outcomes that we would like to achieve by collecting sensor data across the world and creating this community of sensor-enabled folks. One is to sort of democratize science. So we would like someone in the developing world, or a 15-year-old kid somewhere, to ask a question and have 100 people engage them in helping to answer the question by collecting data. So in that sense, we don't just want professors to be the only ones able to take part in the interesting and creative parts of science and leave everybody else to the sort of drudgery of collecting the data, but we want it to sort of be a non-hierarchical system. Sorry, just make sure the sound is all set. Two, we want to make sure that the tools that we develop and these systems are accessible to everybody. So this is a guy who's a bean breeder in Africa, and he's going to use these tools to breed improved heat-tolerant varieties of the common bean. So that was another impetus, motivation. So low cost and accessibility are important to us. Again, this sort of relates to the democratization of science, but it's not just democratization, but it's also an expansion of people contributing to real peer-reviewed science. So there's a lot of citizen science out there, which is fantastic, but most of it never really ends up at the highest sort of echelons of what we consider to be true science, the peer-reviewed stuff. And we think that that can change. And so it's one of our goals. And then finally, being able to answer really big, complex questions about plants that require a global scope. So for example, this was just in the news. They're able to measure photosynthesis from satellites. They're able to estimate photosynthetic activity from satellites. But they've never actually ground truthed those people across the world with devices. We could ground truth satellite photosynthesis data using this device. That's just one example. But there's lots of things that we might be able to figure out. So we have a pretty big community. It says here about 275 people. We probably have 50 to 75 really active people collecting measurements at any given time. This is the device. Again, I'm going to show you all this in detail later, so I'm going to skip it. The device capabilities, it has a CO2 sensor, which is accurate down to a couple parts per million, relative humidity, temperature, and then a PAR sensor. So PAR is photosynthetically active radiation, and that's the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum which is actually absorbed by plants. So 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. So we had to put in some filters and things to get that to work right. As an example of cost difference, a PAR sensor alone from Lycor costs about $500 to $1,000. So ours isn't quite perfect yet, but it's pretty good, and I think the next version is going to be a lot better. We can also measure a lot of photosynthetic parameters. So we can measure, it's called SPAD, but it's just chlorophyll content in the leaf. We can measure photosynthetic activity in the leaf for photosystem 1, and we're working on, for photosystem 2, and we're working on the same thing for photosystem 1. We can measure proton motive force, which is an estimate of ATP production in the leaf. So these measurements are, if you were to make the comparison to your car, this is like going, from now where you can measure the speed at which you're going to being able to measure, the temperature of the engine block, or the rate of air intake. These are very, very specific measurements which sometimes don't have a clear connection to outcomes like yield, but do have a very clear connection to the mechanism of how the plant actually works. And so, one of our goals is if we can collect enough data about these sort of complex measurements in the field, we might be able to identify useful applications. And in a general sense, we have a sort of a little spec. So we have 2 different detectors and a bunch of LEDs. So if you are interested in other types of measurements which use these LEDs, then you could do those as well using absorbance or reflectance. No, I think I missed a slide. No, I guess I deleted that slide. Well, we can also do soil measurements, which Dan can talk about when we test this out, but we can measure soil active carbon or humus levels using a potassium permanganate method. And then we can also measure soil biological activity using that CO2 sensor, and we'll sort of demo that at the end. So just to give some background about photosynthesis, so all of the photosynthesis happens in sort of normal plants inside the chloroplasts. There's these objects called the thylakoid, and this is the thylakoid. There's an inside and outside, the lumen and the stroma. And on this membrane is sort of where all the action happens. That's where photosystem 1 and 2 are. That's where all the light capturing machinery is and all that sort of stuff. Back. So what we can measure is we can measure the light coming in. We can measure the fluorescence going out, which is the rejected light. So that gives us an estimate of photosystem 1. We can do the same thing for photosystem 2. We can measure the accumulation of hydrogen ions in the lumen, which, as they pass through this membrane, is actually the thing that produces ATP. So as a result of estimating this, we can actually estimate ATP production in the cell. And then finally, there's these light harvesting complexes, which is what absorbs the light and sort of feeds the energy back to the photosystem 2 in order to excite an electron. So we can estimate the amount of chlorophyll which is in these light harvesting complexes in total in the plant. And that's the chlorophyll content. So these are all the things that we can measure using the device. And so it's interesting. These things are interesting because it's not like the plant gets hit with a bunch of light, it absorbs it all, and does something useful with every bit. Actually, the plant's getting hit with a bunch of light, and the vast majority of it, it's reflecting, it's deflecting, it's converting to infrared light and rejecting, it's converting to heat internally, or there's losses and all kinds of stuff. And so most of the energy in the plant, and in fact a good portion of its genetic material, is dedicated to dealing with this very high energy particle, which is a photon, in a way that doesn't end up getting it killed. Because if it doesn't handle photons effectively, then it can produce reactive oxygen species, which can damage the plant. So that's why understanding the mechanics is really important, because different plants will react differently to high light or low light conditions. So I think I'm going to skip this part, but it's kind of interesting. This is just talking about fluorescence and how it changes over the course of time. Actually, it's worth saying. So if you hit a plant with some light, it will fluoresce, and this fluorescence is the plant rejecting part of that light energy that's coming in. And the reason that it rejects that energy is because it's limited in how fast it can use the energy. And so if you're giving it more light than it can use, it has to reject the rest as fluorescence. And so what this is showing is if you turn on a light at time 0 and you measure the fluorescence that comes out of the plant, the fluorescence goes up and up and up. So it's rejecting more and more light until it gets to the point where it starts to make these sort of changes, physiological changes within the plant, to be able to accept and more efficiently accept more of that light for photosynthesis. But it takes a little while for the plant to adjust. And so you see then the fluorescence go back down as it becomes more photosynthetically efficient and uses that energy internally. So plants are very complex, and they turn things on and off physiologically at different time scales. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. You're seeing things get turned on and off at different time scales. And it's sort of equivalent to, if you're sleeping and all of a sudden someone yanks you up and shines a bright light in your eyes, that's the equivalent to a plant sitting in the dark and then someone suddenly turning on a really bright light, right? It's not ready to get up, right? For you as a human being, your pupils have to dilate. That's the first thing. Your heart rate has to speed up. It has to pump more blood to your brain so that when you stand up, you don't just fall down, right? And then there's these longer term things that happen, like your stomach starts to growl, because it knows you're up and so it's ready for food, right? And then maybe within 30 or 45 minutes, you're actually ready to go run a race or something, right? And that's the next step, right? Once you've sort of gotten through all these adjustments, you're ready to run your race. And plants are doing the same thing, but they're doing it at a millisecond time scale with variations in light. So anyway, I already went through all this. I kind of did this a little out of order, but this is what I just described. So here's the soil stuff that I just described. I haven't done this presentation in a while, so I kind of did it backwards. But so we're all trying to do this for around $100. It's useful for plant scientists like us because it's low cost, so we can get a lot of devices and measure a lot of stuff. It's very high quality. So we've been making devices similar to this on the bench for $10,000 to $20,000. And the quality of this is pretty darn close to those benchtop units. Also, when we get new grad students and stuff in, this is a much, much easier device to explain, and it's much quicker for people to start to modify protocols and make improvements on this as compared to our benchtop versions, which I'll explain why. Environmental activists, so we're involved in the public lab community, and we're selling the devices through their KITS initiative. Again, low cost is obviously important for everyone, but also it's easy to use, and it's designed to be collaborative. So when you collect data on the device, it's automatically pushing it to the web. It has both an interface through the computer and through your cell phone. It's really designed for people to collect data in a collaborative way. For breeders, a lot of the same issues, but actually we've had to develop a lot of very specific features for breeders because they're collecting really, really large amounts of data in a very short period of time. You know, they want to collect 1,000 data points in a day. And so, you know, we have to make the data collection and the sort of the metadata components or the survey components really efficient for them. And then finally, educator. So we've actually used this device in 2 intro biology classes, one this semester and one last semester. And it was really interesting to see how it got used. The first time, the professor was really sort of top down. And so she had one big project that everyone had to contribute to. The students weren't creating their own projects in any way. They were just collecting data essentially for her. And, you know, this probably wasn't too fun, but they actually got a lot of really interesting data. You can see the map with the data here. There was 6 trees across the campus that they measured. And we did see significant results. This was just watching a drop in chlorophyll content and change in photosynthetic efficiency over the course of the fall on 6 trees. And then the next semester, we tried it with a different person who let the students choose their own project, sort of completely open. And it was better in some ways, but worse in others, because this was an intro class, and students kind of don't know what to do. So if you don't give them some direction, some of them were a little bit lost. So I think the right way to use this tool is somewhere sort of in between. I think next time we're going to bring in some people from the university, like some grounds people, you know, who are maintaining trees and you know, fertilizing lawns and all that sort of stuff, who sort of know interesting places to measure, and maybe some researchers who have some existing projects, and give students the chance to sort of join a project which is meaningful and is already understood, and then within that project, you know, make some tweaks and maybe make some improvements. So it's been interesting. So that was sort of the end of the talk, and then I just sort of wanted to you know, collect a little bit of data, show you how the process works, and then it's probably just most efficient to open it up for questions after that, because I think at that point it's fairly self-explanatory. It'll be based on whatever your guys' interest is. So, any questions so far that, like, I've completely missed something, or otherwise I'll just dive into this? I think we're all right. Okay. Here, let me do this. So then you can see us and the thing at the same time. There we go. Okay, so so we've got a device here. This is the device, sort of ugly looking, but and it's structured like this. It has a clamp, so we're going to clamp the leaf in here. And inside this clamp, there's a bunch of LEDs and detectors, which you can kind of see. And those are going to be doing the bulk of the work. So hopefully you can still see the screen. But this is how you would interact with the device through your computer. It's a Chrome app. And you would go in here, and you would find a project. So for example, let's see. It's a good example project. How about sunflower project? So this is a project from Malawi, actually, where they had a bunch of hybrid sunflower genotypes. Here's the directions. They're not very good because it was just one guy collecting his own data. But you know, you could add a lot more information in the About section. Here's the directions on what I need to do. Here's the protocols that he's measuring. And you can actually create your own protocols. I won't show you all that detail, but you can build your own protocol. And this whole project, by the way, is open source, if I didn't mention that. So the hardware and the software and the data is all sort of free and open. So if you want to change LEDs or modify things, you know, add different sensors, it's there for you. So okay, so we're going to take part in this project. And in any given project, the project creator can add what we call user questions, or like survey questions, so that every time you collect a measurement, you have to answer these questions. So, you know, first one is, where is it located? You know, what block is it? What variety is it? How many weeks after planting? So you can have multiple choice, or you can have manual input questions. You actually also have images now as questions, or as answers. So it can be like an image of corn, an image of soybeans, and an image of wheat, for example. So once I've answered all my questions, Then we're just going to take the device and like that, and we're going to clamp the leaf like this. We're going to connect the device, pretty straightforward, through USB. Make sure it's on, and press go. So it's taking two measurements. The first one was chlorophyll content, and the second one is photosynthetic efficiency. And those are the results. So you can see the traces here. And the way this is actually working is it's running this measurement. It's collecting all of this spectroscopic data. And then we apply what we call a macro to it, which will analyze this data and produce specific outputs. Like we're interested in chlorophyll content SPAD, right? But we had to calculate from this graph to get this number. So that's what the macro does. Again, you can create your own macro. So this is a SPAD value. This is actually correlated with Minolta SPAD, if you're familiar with that, sort of the standard device. So. And actually, SIG's group, Aaron Anders in SIG's group, went to Africa and compared our device with an AtLeaf and a Minolta SPAD, and our correlation to the Minolta SPAD was 0.9, and the AtLeaf's correlation, which is an existing commercially sold competitor, was 0.83. So we felt pretty good about that. This is the other trace. So Phi2 is photosynthetic efficiency. This is saying 70% of the incoming light is going on to do photochemistry, to do useful work. 30% is being fluoresced back out. That's what that number is saying. This is linear electron flow. This is a measure of how much energy is being dissipated as heat from photosynthesis. So you can see there's a bunch of stuff here in addition to your standard stuff like light intensity and relative humidity and temperature. And again, all this information gets pulled from the contents of this spectroscopic trace. So once you're done, you click keep, and that would submit the data to the database, and then we could go analyze that data. So I'm not going to, because this isn't a project. I'm not in Malawi, obviously, but that's what you would do. And then we can go look at that data. So let's go take a look. Oops. So here's our project. Again, same information here. But if we go to dashboard, then we can start to analyze our data. So we can go look, see how many data points there is. There's 275 data points in this data set. We can plot things, like for example, we can say, how does light intensity relate to linear electron flow, or let's say photosynthetic efficiency. So see how that relates. It actually relates, pretty nicely. You can see that really high light intensities. So 2,000 microeinsteins is full sun. You can get higher than that apparently when you have like poofy clouds that kind of reflect some additional sun down to people. So that's why you get higher numbers here. But you can see that when you get really high light intensity, your photosynthetic efficiency goes down because the plant's getting so much light, it can't use it all. It's having to reflect it more. It's having to convert it into heat or try to dissipate it. So this is the relationship that you would expect to see. So we can also filter things. We could say, well, are there differences here by variety, for example? So we can look at the different varieties. And this was from the data that we entered, right, when we collected the data. We can look at the different varieties and see if there's differences. I don't see big differences here. It's a little bit messy. But we could go to try to do something like an average. Let's just see if average Phi2 is different. Well, not really, right? There's a lot of variation in Phi2. So I don't see a lot of big differences here in the average. So the next step, once you've played with this, oh shoot, this one didn't have map. There's actually a mapping function I can show you, but normally mapping works. This one doesn't have it. You can see the data just in a raw data set. You can save it as a CSV. So anyway, this is the basic function. There's a lot more than this. You can actually save sessions and share them collaboratively. So instead of just taking a picture, like a screenshot, and sharing with this, you'd actually share a link, and they would load this page, and it would be an actionable page. They could click on things, sort of pick up right from where you left off. So we've been trying to focus on collaboration to develop this. But a lot of the times, because of the complexity of these measurements, you really have to do statistics. We can't see differences here, but can we see differences when we run statistics? So we've been doing that quite a bit. So this is a program called StatWing, totally unrelated to us, but I like it because you can basically just drag and drop your data set into it and get interesting results. So here's the sunflower data, actually. And we ran some regression models with SPAD and Phi2, and you can sort of see the results. It's pretty interesting. Phi2 relates to light intensity. It actually relates to the location of the leaf on the plant. That was an interesting result. It was dependent on which station they were going to, lots of different things. So we've done this enough times where we know that these measurements have statistical power, meaning you can do some prediction with them, and we're working on doing QTL mapping and sort of marker-assisted selection related work this summer with breeders here at MSU. So that's pretty much the platform. I don't know if there's also an Android app. I totally ignored that, but it's similar to the Chrome app we just had, similar functionality, except it's on your Android phone. So yeah, let me get back to where I was here, and how do I get back to?
So your looks like your video is off.
Yeah, here. I'll just share this. Like, I don't know how to get back to the camera. I'll just share that. There you go. So then now Dan's going to talk about some soil applications.
Great.
Yeah. So also, and I will use the mobile app just because it's easier to do. So this device generally connects to an Android phone with Bluetooth. And so I'll show you a little bit what we do with soils here. Normally what we have is a canister that we can put over in situ in the field, and then you can get biological activity curves, so CO2 flux curves right in the field. Okay, I should have thought of this a minute ago. I need to connect this. Yeah. So the idea is, and I do this with the canister because I worry sometimes about root respiration can affect. You start not being sure if you're getting root respiration or if you're getting microbial activity. So if you really want to look at how healthy your soil is, how much microbial activity is going on, you want to be able to separate those out, which is why we look at these different, look at it different ways. And I'm going to be doing a lot of protocol development over the next couple of months to find the best way to do a quick in situ measurement of soil quality. So what I'll do here is I'll just put the device right inside, and then I can take my measurement, and that'll go for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll get a CO2 curve, and we can then take that data, graph it, and we can get like a flux rate, which is micrograms of carbon per meter squared per second. And the idea is with that, and also with the EC meter that Greg mentioned earlier, and hopefully we also have on another device we can do a cuvette holder as a spectroscopy, so we can do some wet chem stuff right in the lab, or right out in the field. Sorry. The idea is that we can take these different pieces and start mapping soil properties because all the data points are geotagged, instead of taking everything back to the lab and looking at it and then not being able to really relate it back to your fields. Everything's geotagged. We'll have a list of protocols that we can do right in the field and that can help you make management. that will also go together with the various plant measurements that we hope will become more predictive as we get more power and more measurements put together.
Yeah, and I just sort of like as a general like conceptual framework, like this is how I'm gonna write it up here. Right? This is how we tend to like think about where the real opportunities are. So like I was talking to you before about photosynthetic efficiency. So like this phi2 for phi2, and we saw on that graph, right, that as light intensity goes up, phi2 goes down, and so you get this curve. And so, but the problem, of course, with phi2 is that on any given leaf on any given day, the leaf might be, you know, this intensity or this intensity or this intensity, and that can even change over the course of a few minutes, right? So it's hard to know if you get a phi2 of 0.3, is that good or bad? Is it normal or not normal? Well, you just don't know. If you knew this entire curve for a plant at any given time, that would be very descriptive. You'd understand sort of, you know, a plant that looks like this versus a plant that looks like this, that might be a health difference, right? Or that might be a disease, or that might be a lack of water. But if you just give somebody one phi2 value, it doesn't tell you very much. So that's why we see this as an opportunity, because in the world where we have a community across the world that's capable of taking large numbers of measurements, we can start to collect like more of this data and really fill out this curve. Whereas if you were using something like the LICOR, the traditional LICOR is like a $60,000 instrument that's really slow to use, gives you very, very accurate data, but it's very, very slow. You're only really ever going to get one of these points. So anytime that there's an opportunity to where you have a good measurement, it just requires a wide range of values from the field. That's an opportunity we can engage. So in the case of soil, you know, now just replace this with
Soil
moisture,
yep.
right? And
flux.
Right. And, you know, here, this one's a little more complicated because now you got temperature. Like, you know, potentially, so you've got 3 ways. But the point is, enough data, and you can know flux, right? At any given soil type. And so we tend to try to look for opportunities where there's opportunity hidden in complexity, which can be addressed by quantity of data. So that's like the general concept. And I think,
Yeah, I think that's
pretty much it.
pretty much it. Yeah, I think it's good to open up people.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys. And everyone else is coming back on. Sorry, in the midst of that, I may have muted a few folks, just I think as people are presenting, background noise from other people's mics can sort of override the presenters' mics. But so thanks, guys, for the presentation. I think before jumping into rounds of questions, I think you guys have seen this before, but the 2 questions we like to typically ask presenters are, how do you envision this helping farmers in particular? And also, what are the sort of barriers that you've faced that collaboration could really help with?
How does it help farmers if we're able to collect? There's 2 levels of how does it help. The first level is people like academics or plant breeders or ag extension folks who can sort of use this now because they have the ability to interpret complex data. So that's one. When we have a sufficient amount of data, then we can start to provide real-time feedback and interpretation through modeling, right? But you have to have a sufficient quantity of data. So it only helps farmers once we get enough data that we can start to provide feedback that's relevant to a farmer. That's the reality, which is why our first sort of focus collaborators are academics and plant breeders and stuff. The second question, I mean, collaboration is tons of ways. Obviously, the whole platform is built on collaboration, so that's obvious. But actually, we would really, really love more collaboration between developers, which is exactly why you guys are, you know, doing this. Because, you know, we would love to access other people's APIs and other data, which would help, you know, our users better predict and better model what they're trying to do. We would love to ship our data out through an API. We would love to use common libraries. We've been talking with the Open Data Kit folks, we developed our app from scratch. Then PKS developed their app from scratch. Then there's a bunch of other people who developed their app from scratch, and then other people who've used the Open Data Kit. And it seems silly that we're all doing that. And if there's a way to collaborate, that would be super useful. So on the developer side, as much as anything, we would love to.
Yeah, and also I'd say on the usefulness to farmers, I think there's two ways that it comes in. One, like a lot of these soil tools can allow farmers to map their fields more accurately. People who might not be involved in precision agriculture but still want to be able to do some of that stuff on their own, be able to look at EC or biological activity across the field, so we can start creating maps of where you have good soil and bad soil. That's kind of the simpler one. The more complicated one, which goes to what Greg said, was the idea of having the big data. Is the idea to be able to give real-time feedback for your crops that are growing in that field that day. What do I need to do to improve management? So there's two levels of where this could be applicable for farmers.
Or should I sell or should I buy? I mean, that to me is the one that I feel like is first. The plant on a certain day, and by day 30 that the plants are this tall and they look like this and they have this much activity and they're this weak. That could give you a prediction or estimate for what they're going to be. And of course, anybody who's been a farmer would say, well, sure, but it's actually all completely dependent on the weather, and that's true. I've been there, so I get that, but better to have something than nothing. And I feel like this is building into being able to do better prediction earlier in the season.
Great. All right. Folks can unmute themselves if they like now. Sorry about that. I feel a little bit tyrannical, but just trying to reduce all the background noise so we can get in now. Seems like they're in the bowels of the building there, as engineers tend to be. So, great. Well, I think with that we can open it up to questions. I'm sure there's plenty of folks here who'd love to talk APIs and that kind of development stuff. So.
Absolutely, Dan. That was thank you so much for that presentation. I thought that was really exciting, and I've been following you guys for a long time, and it's great to see the progress you made. And specifically, I mean, there are so many different directions this can go with the collaborations represented in this group, but a couple things that really jumped out for me is something that I've been looking at for the next stage for Farm OS, and we're working with Cornell and the Soil Health Test, and also with the National Soil Health Testing Initiative. And I've been really pushing that we should be not just talking about lab-based testing, but how much can we move into the field, and be doing more right there in place and aggregate stability. I mean, you've got active carbon and restoration, and you're moving in that direction. So I'm very excited about that, and excited to continue that conversation through this process. But I also see one of the things that I was really excited to see how far you've come with the research presentation and analysis of the data, integrating directly in. It's something that I think would be wonderful to look at for a research module of Farm OS, so we can combine that with the management data.
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of see there's another way in which we could even look at published data. As you have new data points coming in, you can be actively running those stats. And I can also imagine for farmers or for people who are getting started, if you're looking at it from the Farm OS perspective, there are standard ways in which you structure bots or even recruit other members to get to the required amount of data. Say, this is the question I want to ask,
Right.
these are the numbers of points, and then this is the stats package. And you could really walk people through that and have the reporting essentially done at the end. Because so many projects, it's doing the same thing again and again and again.
Yep. Totally.
So that was, anyway, I had been imagining it, and then here you've been moving along right along in that path. So that's fantastic.
It's there's a lot of it. Let me throw one more thing out there. Like, there's, along the lines of what you described, something that I went and talked to a plant breeder here, and I was sort of asking him how he does things and how the process works. And basically they'll take 50 varieties and they'll cross them, and they'll get like 150,000 crosses. They'll plant them all in the field, and then literally this one guy, who's like 70 or something now, walks around through the field and just points. He's like, that one. And then it's like that one, and then that one, and I mean his intuition is just like crazy. I mean he is it. He is the primary funnel for taking crosses to a finished like marketable product, and I just thought that was so interesting. But the problem is, of course, that all of those 150,000 crosses experience the same weather conditions, right? So he just selected for the cross in mind that was perfect for that year. Right, and sure, you do this over the course of 5-6 years, and if they were all drought years, you've got a drought resistant. If they were all, what I mean, it's all dependent on where you are. And so, we could do something like, you could have like a U.S. wide like seed development network. So you got your 150,000 crosses, and you ship them out in replicates to like 1,000 collaborators, and you give them the direction. You say, this is how you grow it, and then you're collecting temperature and relative humidity data, and you've got the where they're located, the soil data, and the whole 9 yards. And now, instead of like selecting for one thing in a year, you've now selected for 1,000 different locations on a single cross. Like the potential is just lots of stuff.
Well, and the power there is like you can ask that question and structure it that way, but we can also be exploratory with that. We could with that data too, so we can be looking at whole other sets of questions that may not have even occurred to the original designer, and that to me is a lot of the excitement here, because I really feel like when we get into these field situations and we're adding the diversity, we have a lot of questions. We're really in an exploratory phase with a lot of this stuff, I think.
Yeah.
So we can ask, we can do some of the investigative research, and that's great. You need some of that, but I feel the opportunity with these tools, and as we reduce the cost, there's a lot of potential for asking a lot more questions. So.
Yeah.
I like that example of plant breeding too, because I feel like in terms of breeding, what gets bred and what for is driven largely by a lot of kind of what's most marketable and commercial objectives. So a lot of other crops and different sectors of ag kind of get short shrift because there's the most interest, of course, in breeding corn. And so being able to use a simple tool like this that's cheap to empower smaller breeders or different breeding programs that's really cool.
So I had another question about you mentioned about ground truthing satellite imagery at sort of the macro scale. But one of the issues that I've been doing some imaging of plot level imaging using UAVs, and one of the major issues, of course, is image calibration and ground truthing, and there's a lot of work to be done on that. Have you started dialogues with anybody as far as setting up at the plot level?
Yes, I talked to Emily.
Oh, right.
No, so we talked into one researcher here who does a lot of work with that, trying to do putting together climate models plus DPI and various remote sensing to try to do models for farmers. So we want to send it to devices along with him, and I actually believe this year to see how well this device will either to ground truth or to supplement and boost up the data that he has to improve the power of the system.
Yeah, there's another guy here, Marty Chilvers, who's more like an extension guy. He's going to try UAV stuff this year again, honestly. So, and we're going to be working in his field, so kind of by default, actually, we should be able to compare that data. But up until now, not really. This summer, hopefully, yes. we've been we've been on the list for like a year, so we're trying to get these devices out, but we just stuck in manufacturing. We're just doing the best we can. Hopefully, we had our 3D printer go down, and our manufacturing guy broke his elbow, and it's like 2 weeks, nothing. Hopefully, in the next week.
What?
Great
I
work, you
think that's
guys.
part of
Thanks
the
so
open.
much.
Go ahead.
One or two questions for the field soil work. Do you have an upside down Tupperware or cake lid or something like that? You plop over the soil, throw it in, and take your readings?
Yeah, basically.
Pretty much it.
Yeah, basically something that you can make an airtight chamber. Yeah.
Great. And through Public Labs, we can go on and get one of these today?
No, that's what I'm saying. We suck at manufacturing. So pretty much we had like I have a list about I probably had another 50 people on the list that are like Dorn, who's been waiting there for a year. The next, like 50 devices I make, like they basically will get sucked up in 2 days. I'll send emails out to all those folks and say, okay, your device is ready, go buy one. And then hopefully we'll get through that list, and then other people who are interested, can get devices. But our strategy actually has changed a little bit because it does take us so long to make a device. Our strategy is moving towards like a share, like almost like a lending library, where if you need a device, we just ship it to you, for a month. Because a lot of people, they're using this device for 2 weeks, They have a greenhouse experiment, they need it for 2 weeks. And then it sits around for a year, which to us is silly because we're trying to collect data, and test the platform and all that sort of stuff. And if we ship out 50 devices and on any given day only one is being used, that kind of sucks. So we do kind of have that in place now. So, yeah. But so our long-term goals are to try to address that question. Our long-term goals are we're going to make a version 1.0. This is a beta unit. So our version 1.0 we're going to try to get by next spring. So next sort of planting year, have it be ready by spring. We're designing it right now. We've learned a ton of lessons about every aspect of the device, and it should be ready by then. Hopefully it's more capable of connecting to other devices. So if you've got other sensors and stuff, you can actually do that with this one, but it's hard to get in there. You can have like solder and wires and stuff. But we've connected soil moisture sensors and other sorts of stuff to it. We're also working on, as it relates to soil, which I would love some thoughts on this. We have like a little cyclic voltammetry add-on if you've ever done cyclic voltammetry before. And then there's a group here that's using cyclic voltammetry to identify very specific compounds. So, for example, they're using it to identify like pesticide residue on fruits and stuff like that. But it's a really general-purpose platform. Like we were talking about identifying abscisic acid, which is produced in really high quantities when plants are stressed, sort of a very immediate stress response. And there might be soil type, which would be interesting for that as well. So that'll be an add-on, and we'll have a bunch of new stuff. So, yeah.
This is really cool. I'm glad that I joined the call to see this. It's really cool. Thanks again for presenting on it. It's got my ideas going in a lot of directions too, in terms of Carmel specifically, but then also bigger ideas too. With the FarmOS specific stuff, I could definitely see integration into like the observation log types, so that you could somehow connect it directly to save that data to your FarmOS. You would still need to be able to connect to statistical analysis software, because FarmOS isn't doing that right now. But just as a place to store it, or to easily link it conceptually to areas or things that your crops are planting in a system that you're tracking. So that would be neat to explore. And then, like, thinking big in the big picture, I could see combining the UAVs with this, and you have an army of quad copters that go out and just measure specific plants on a regular basis, and then do all that work for you over time and give you this huge data set of year after year from the same place.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's a way to
Oh yeah, it's always not like cockroach-sized ones, but I mean there are some of these measurements you could put on a UAV, which that's possible, but we have to get the things done we have in front of us.
Yeah.
I would be really, really curious from your guys' from FarmOS side. We're developing our APIs, but we're kind of doing it in the absence of a specific user of the API. We're just kind of like, oh, probably we can ship this, and probably we can ship that. But if you kind of like mapped out, here's how it fits into our system, here's what we need, here's what it needs to look like, here's the data we expect, that would really help us make the API work for you. Otherwise, it's hard for us to know.
Well, that's exactly the outcome that we want from these conversations. So,
yeah.
is to begin that process. The other question I had is like you mentioned that the platform is expandable. I can definitely see. I sort of mentioned that it would be logical to move towards penetrometer and other field type measurements. Because there's a lot of the functionality would be nice to have along with that. You already have the moisture meter. I've sort of imagined a pH moisture meter penetrometer with something like this.
Right.
And if you add color in with it, that's pretty exciting. Is that already come up? Do you have folks that are working on that?
Penetrometer? No, we haven't started working on that.
No, not that one. But you mean just like other pieces of hardware that other
basically, it's already Bluetooth, so it doesn't even have to be physically connected to it. But if you add in, if you've got the interface for a lot of the rest of it to go along with that, I can sort of imagine a suite of tests at a location that shows up, and you're logging that on your field, and a lot of those are immediately useful to the farmer. So I'm thinking from the farmer use case rather than the researcher use case. You can add some of these things and get immediate feedback rather than having to wait through a model to process the feedback.
Well, I mean, I can honestly say that we're pretty busy, but one of our main limitations on development is actually not understanding the applications as much as it is the actual hardware. So we've got really, really great hardware designers in the lab who, especially when it comes to like analog circuitry type of designs, which a lot of these are, he's very, very good. Most of what you pay for in those tools is the development cost. And that's totally reasonable. As a company, you've got to recoup your development costs. I'm not saying that's unreasonable, but as a university, we can absorb that development cost and therefore produce something which is relatively inexpensive because the development cost is within the university.
Right. Because we know load cells and things like that, $30 and you've got a load cell.
Right. Yeah. No, totally right. Now someone has to sit down and spend quite a while thinking about how to make it work robustly and effectively, and
exactly.
And that's where the effort comes in. But no, the actual, the pieces are generally not always. Yeah.
Well, I feel that and so one of the questions that was asked is how could this group help, and I really think that that's one of the things that we, as a larger community, can really help build those use cases out, and sort of fill in some of those gaps, so we can get this in the field and come up with the things. One of the things that I like to see is how can we make this useful today, meanwhile building the case for those larger libraries to make it much more powerful in the future, but sort of incrementally have value in the meantime.
Yeah.
So sometimes that might be something a little bit off track from the bigger research objectives, but that's kind of the motivation behind FarmOS too.
Yeah, and it is hard to we're sort of struggling. I'm struggling about how we're going to interact with ODK because we have a big push through one of our partners to sort of merge with ODK or use interface backend, which I think is great. But when you're developing it 100 miles an hour, and then someone says oh, now by the way, go integrate with this thing that you know nothing about, you just kind of go I don't want. It's gonna it feels like it's gonna slow you down a lot. But we kind of have to get over that, I think, and do what's right in the long term, as long as it's right. You know, there might be actual limitations of using it. Hard to know. I don't know. I think we should. I would love to have some sort of like conference, or like get together or something with all these groups. I know that we learn a lot, and some of the API issues and stuff. I think we'll knock out in a relative.
Well, we're gonna have a it's not a conference, and Dan and I talked about that may be one of the outcomes from this this series is is that there will clearly be a need for much more in depth than we're going to get to in these initial conversations. But I know Chris Fasty already, I guess, is one of your members with part of the public lab community, and I guess he has one in hand. So he's bringing it to our farm for our annual iFarm event. So we'll be able to play with that along. And the idea for that weekend is to put a number of these sensors together and do a little bit of that sort of hackathon for the weekend and see what we can have come up. The folks who are doing the open pipe kit on the remote sensors are also going to be there. But that's the kind of thing that I think would be really exciting to formalize, in a bigger way as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I can say, because we were talking about having a conference for open scientific hardware in a broader sense outside of ag here. We ended up going to do it in CERN. I think that's the big idea. But we probably have the money here. If you guys wanted to have a conference, probably we could find money in some hotel space and pay for some people to come and do it. We have a lot of. This project gets a lot of traction, so if we wanted to do something like that, we could do it. If that's a limitation on anyone's end, the limitation on our end is organizing. So like, suck at that. But we could probably make the rest. If there's any interest in that.
Yeah, it does sound interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think too. I was talking with Dan yesterday, and just I see the possible. I'm glad that you guys, PharmOS and Photosynq, have made this connection, because I see the potential for integration of those two things to be really cool, and particularly also super useful for producers. The possibility. There's all sorts of interest in being able to map your soils better and map your yields, things like that, using all sorts of tools. But all that's out there at this moment is really expensive. You either have to hire, somebody that's going to kind of drive through your field with an on-the-go NIR to map soil organic matter, and that's hugely destructive. Or you have to have all the kind of additional units on your tractor or combine, that kind of thing. So something that costs $100, and if it can integrate with an open source management software, which is why I'd be so excited if that kind of Dan was describing possibly having like an attachment where you could take a soil core and just kind of scan down it and through NIR get organic matter values. Being able to take that and have those samples geotagged and then kind of interface with PharmOS and produce something like a map of the soil quality across your field, that's just, oh man, that's what the future looks like to me, and that would be really exciting. So.
Well, I think we could. I have a feeling you get the programmers in the room, and then the app with the people who are applied, actually use the device for a couple of days. My guess is you can knock it out pretty quick. I really do think that. A lot of this stuff, you just got to get the right people in the room. And then...
Right. I mean, but between what you guys are doing and if you add in a couple other simple field tests like aggregate stability and some of the sensor-based stuff with water capacity that can be calculated through remote sensing, you're getting most of the way through a comprehensive soil test in the field. So it's, I don't think it's at all far-fetched, and I don't think we're all that far from it personally, but.
Well, yeah, like I said, let's figure it out.
Let's do it.
Our programmers are here, so I mean, I know it. If you got Pro and you guys into a room for a couple of days, and we kind of want to do that with this open scientific hardware conference too, in a broader sense. Just kick people together. I mean, it's just, I mean, right now on the mobile app, for example, we're like collecting the data, it's getting put into a specific format, which is a JSON, and then it's getting submitted, like to our server. But I'm sure to get submitted to your server in the format that you need, a lot of that's just make sure you've got the right curly brackets in the right places, and make sure you know what the address. It's like it's not. And to get it connected is not that complicated. To get it all done right and exact and stuff, yes, that's longer term. But like in 2-3 days, you could probably get things connected. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see, with Foremost specifically, I could see a Photosync module that just uses the Photosync data structure itself. So, if we're, as opposed to trying to figure out one that works for both of us, or that we, convert to and from some standardized format because maybe that doesn't exist yet. But just making this Photosync specific module would just give you another place to send the data in addition to, so you can do both and use it for different purposes. Maybe one for analysis, one for organization, something like that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I mean, the tools like the Data Explorer tool that you guys saw is all written in JavaScript. I mean, you could even take that, you could really work it and stick it in your site. I mean, it's all done client side.
Okay.
So once you get that raw stuff, you could pull that into the site, or you could do iframe. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. But yeah, and we're gonna move towards more server-side processing as the client is only processing. But once we move towards server-side processing, you're gonna be able to make calls like request, what's the average value for this. So you'll have a pretty robust API, hopefully. Yep, we have words.
Oh, cool.
So yeah.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like we're at a little after 4 o'clock. So I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer, but just wanted to acknowledge our time frame here.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm sure this conversation could go on for quite a while, but yeah,
I hope it does.
Yeah, exactly. But in the interest of kind of keeping it to an hour, we'll, I guess, kind of stop the live broadcast, and but yeah, we'll hang on for a few. So, thanks again for presenting, you guys. Great. With that, see you all later.